I knew something was off the moment I got that letter from the bank. It was a Tuesday. I had just come back from a 16-hour shift. I'm a paramedic, and all I wanted was a shower and a sandwich. Instead, I found a thick envelope from First Valley Mortgage sitting in my mailbox with a sticky note attached. Urgent review required. Inside were copies of my mortgage documents, except they weren't the ones I signed. My name is Carter Belling, and I own a modest 2-story home in the Brookhaven Ridge subdivision. I bought it 7 years ago, and I've never missed a payment. Not once. So when I saw the interest rate on the mortgage had changed, and that I apparently signed off on an escrow modification I never even heard about, my stomach dropped. And then I saw my signature. Except it wasn't mine. It was a sloppy attempt at forgery. The loops on the B in Belling were way off, and whoever did it forgot that I sign with my middle initial. I wasn't just angry, I was boiling, but I wasn't stupid either. I didn't call the bank, not yet. I needed to know where this came from. That's when it hit me, the HOA. More specifically, Susan Whitmore. Susan is the president of the Brookhaven Ridge HOA. Picture every HOA horror story rolled into one middle-aged woman with shoulder pads and a pearl necklace she probably wears to bed. She's the kind of woman who writes up citations for violations, like leaving your trash, can out 10 minutes past pickup, or having more than 2 garden gnomes. She's also the kind of person who sits on the Architectural Review Board, the Finance Committee, and the real kicker, the Mortgage Verification Subcommittee, which she invented herself last year and bullied the board into approving. I'd laughed when I heard about it. Who in the world needs a mortgage verification subcommittee? Apparently me. I got to work. First, I pulled out my original closing documents from the fireproof box in my closet. I compared them line by line to the ones from the bank. The differences weren't just in the interest rate. The repayment term had been extended by 5 years, and an entirely new clause added some kind of HOA escrow oversight fee. That's not legal. Not without my signature, and definitely not without my consent. The next morning, I went down to the county registrar's office. The clerk, a woman named Meredith who'd seen every kind of fraud imaginable, helped me pull up the public record of my mortgage. Sure enough, it had been updated 2 weeks ago by a notary named W. Kramer. I asked for the notary log, and Meredith raised an eyebrow but printed it for me. There it was. Carter Belling Mortgage Amendment witnessed by Susan Whitmore, notarized by W. Kramer. I stared at that line for a long time. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't even spoken to Susan in over a month, unless you count her passive-aggressive notes about my mailbox needing repainting. That's when I knew Susan forged my signature, submitted it to the bank, and had it notarized under false pretenses. That wasn't just a violation of HOA policy. That was straight-up mortgage fraud. I left the registrar with copies of everything and drove straight to my buddy Damien's house. He's not just a friend, he's an assistant district attorney. He whistled when he saw the documents. "Carter, this is felony-level stuff," he said. "She altered financial documents, forged a signature, and submitted it to a financial institution. That's prison time." I nodded. "I want to take her down properly. No shortcuts. I don't want her fired from the HOA. I want her wearing orange." Damien gave me a grin. "Then we build the case." The next few days were a blur of collecting evidence. I installed a hidden camera on my front door just in case Susan tried anything else. I went to the bank and requested a full audit trail of any changes made to my loan. The clerk, a sharp woman named Janessa, pulled up the logs and froze when she saw the IP address of the submission. "Sir, this wasn't submitted from your account. It came from a Brookhaven Ridge HOA email address." Bingo, I asked her to print the logs and sign off on the chain of custody. She agreed, and I added it to my growing folder of evidence. I even got a copy of the notary's certification. Turns out W. Kramer had notarized 5 other mortgage amendments from Brookhaven Ridge residents over the past 6 months, all witnessed by Susan Whitmore. I started knocking on doors. One by one, I asked my neighbors if they'd ever signed mortgage changes, Most looked confused. A few were furious. One of them, a retired Air Force colonel named Marvin, nearly punched his garage wall when I showed him the forged document under his name. "I didn't sign a damn thing," Marvin growled. "That woman's been sniffing around my property for months." By the end of the week, I had statements from 4 other homeowners, all with suspicious mortgage updates. All of them had signed documents witnessed by Susan Whitmore and notarized by Kramer. Now I had a pattern. I handed everything over to Damien, who looped in a financial crimes investigator from the DA's office. They set up a sting operation. Meanwhile, I played it cool. I still waved at Susan when she drove by in her Lexus, pretending I didn't know a thing. But I did add an extra garden gnome to the front lawn just to mess with her. Then the call came. It was Damien. "Pack your schedule tomorrow morning. We're serving warrants." I stood in my driveway at 7 a.m. the next day with a cup of coffee in hand. That's when the black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood, lights flashing but sirens off. Susan's house was the first stop. I watched as investigators went around back, knocked on the front door, and when she refused to open it, forced entry. She came out screaming. "This is a misunderstanding. I was helping the residents. This is harassment." But no one was listening. They cuffed her on the spot. Susan Whitmore was arrested for mortgage fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Her face turned purple when she saw me standing across the street. I just raised my coffee cup and nodded. Justice felt good. The morning after Susan's arrest, the neighborhood was vibrating with quiet chaos. Lawn sprinklers ticked like normal, but every porch had a resident peeking from behind curtains, whispering to a spouse or pretending to check their mail twice in 1 hour. I didn't blame them. No one ever expects their HOA president to be hauled off for financial crimes. I spent the morning compiling digital copies of everything I'd already turned over to Damien and the DA's office. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. I had neighbors who'd been defrauded, and some of them were older, less tech-savvy, more likely to trust someone like Susan without question. If prosecutors needed more evidence, I wanted to be ready. I also had one more thing to do. I drove to the notary's office listed on the official filings W. Kramer's place. It was a converted garage behind a modest tan duplex, tucked into the edge of a less glamorous part of town. I buzzed the intercom and waited. A gaunt man in his 60s cracked open the door. His eyes darted like he was expecting someone else, probably someone with a badge. "You're not from the state," he said. "No," I said. "But if you don't mind, I have a few questions about a document you notarized." He didn't invite me in, but he didn't close the door either. I handed him a copy of the forged mortgage amendment under my name. "You signed off on this. Can you tell me when I supposedly came in to sign it?" He stared at the page like it was a bad dream he didn't want to remember. "I don't keep all the logs," he said. "Just did what I was told." "By Susan Whitmore?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "She brought 5 or 6 of these over the last few months. Said the homeowners couldn't come in person. Said they were military, traveling, or sick. She had their signatures already and asked me to stamp them as a favor." "You know that's illegal, right?" He rubbed his forehead. "I know now." I pulled out my phone and tapped the record button. "Would you be willing to say that to investigators, that she brought forged documents and asked you to notarize them without seeing the signers?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'll talk. I don't want to go to prison over her." I left with a recorded statement and a signed affidavit. By the time I got back home, my phone was ringing again. This time it was Marvin, the retired colonel. His voice was sharp, clipped. That woman had access to our HOA budget too. "I just pulled the last 6 months of financials. There's a payout labeled consulting fee every month, same amount. $2,500. Guess who the check's made out to?" "Please don't say Susan." "Nope, her niece, lives out in Arizona, never been to a board meeting." I already checked the HOA bylaws. There's no provision for a consulting position. I exhaled slowly. This was bigger than just mortgage fraud. Susan had been siphoning HOA funds under a fake position, funneling the money to a relative. That was embezzlement. And it meant she'd been manipulating more than just paperwork. I asked Marvin to send me the scanned documents. He did within the hour. I forwarded everything to Damien and included the audio from the notary. His response was short. This just got deeper. We're expanding the investigation. That evening, I walked over to the community bulletin board near the pool. A few residents were gathered under the pergola, whispering in hushed tones. When they saw me, the talking stopped. Gina, who lived 3 houses down and ran a home bakery out of her kitchen, stepped forward. "Carter, is it true about Susan?" I nodded. "Yeah, and there's more coming. She forged mortgage documents under at least 5 names, including mine. She also funneled HOA money to fake consultants." An older man named Frank muttered something under his breath. Gina looked like she might cry. "She fined me $300 last month for having a chalk drawing on my driveway," she said. I asked for an appeal and she told me the committee denied it, but there's no record of a committee meeting. "She's been running everything solo," I said. "No checks, no oversight, that ends now." The crowd grew over the next hour. People brought copies of their fines, notices, even blank violation slips that had been stuck to their doors without explanation. Some were handwritten, most weren't signed. Everyone had a story. Someone's backyard swing set was called a visual nuisance. Another had been fined for improper mailbox font. One guy had a fee for unapproved car color. "We need an emergency meeting," Marvin said. "Board or no board, we can't let this stand." Gina nodded. "We need to elect a new interim president, someone who isn't going to treat us like toddlers with a leash." They all looked at me. "Don't even think about it," I said. "I work 70-hour weeks. I can barely handle my own lawn." Marvin stepped forward. "Fine, then help us call the meeting. You've already done the hard part. We'll handle the rest." I agreed to help draft the petition. According to the HOA bylaws, if 1/3 of homeowners signed a motion for emergency assembly, the board was obligated to hold it within 5 days. By the next afternoon, we had over half the neighborhood on board. The emergency meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning in the community center. Meanwhile, Susan had posted bail. She returned home 2 days after her arrest. Her Lexus pulled into the driveway like nothing had happened. She kept her head down, but I noticed the blinds in her office window twitching as people walked past. No one waved. No one stopped. For someone who thrived on control, isolation was probably worse than the charges hanging over her. On Friday, I got a call from Damien. "We're filing additional charges," he said. "Wire fraud, misuse of public funds, and conspiracy. We also subpoenaed the HOA's internal emails. You were right, she created fake meeting minutes and backdated approval votes. We're looking at over $40,000 in misappropriated funds." I whistled. "Is Kramer cooperating?" "Fully. He gave us timestamps, emails, and a sworn statement. The feds might take jurisdiction if the bank fraud crosses state lines." "We'll know soon." The next morning, the community center was packed. People stood shoulder to shoulder, some holding manila folders, others with notepads. Marvin opened the meeting and read the motion to remove the current board leadership due to criminal misconduct and abuse of power. The vote was unanimous. Gina was elected interim president. Marvin took over the finance committee, and the first motion passed under the new board. A full audit of the HOA's books going back 5 years. As the meeting ended, I stepped outside for air. Kids were riding bikes again. Someone had started a grill. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood felt like a place people wanted to live in. Susan's house sat dark and quiet, blinds still drawn, but her reign was over, and we weren't just rebuilding, we were watching now. It had been 5 days since the emergency meeting. Susan's Lexus hadn't moved an inch, and no one had seen her leave the house. The blinds in the upstairs window were slightly parted during the day, but no lights came on at night. It was like she was trying to disappear without physically leaving. I figured she was waiting to see how much worse things could get. They were about to. That Thursday, Damien called again. His tone was different this time, not just serious, but deliberate. "We're issuing a second round of warrants," he said. "This goes deeper than we thought." I leaned against the kitchen counter, phone pressed to my ear. "How deep are we talking?" She didn't just forge documents and misappropriate HOA funds. We found evidence she tried to leverage those forged mortgage amendments to secure a line of credit against homeowners' properties. I blinked. She used our homes as collateral? Exactly. She submitted a bundle of altered mortgage files to a private lender, Midland Commercial Group, and attempted to qualify the HOA for a six-figure revolving line of credit. She framed it as a reserve fund for community revitalization projects. Was it approved? No. The lender flagged inconsistencies in the signatures and demanded in-person verification. That was 2 weeks before we got involved. She never followed up. I let out a breath, trying to process it. So she was planning to borrow against fake equity and funnel it where? "That's what we're working on," Damien said. "But the money trail's murky. We've already found a shell company in Nevada tied to her maiden name. She might have been setting up to siphon funds if the loan had gone through." I didn't answer right away. My thoughts were racing past each other. If Susan had pulled that off, we could have all ended up liable for a loan we never agreed to with our names fraudulently attached to it. "Has the lender pressed charges?" I asked. "They filed a report with the Financial Crimes Division. We're coordinating with state investigators now. The feds may take jurisdiction since it involves attempted wire fraud and interstate financial deception." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I looked out the window toward Susan's house. The blinds were still cracked open. I couldn't see her, but I felt her watching. "Let me know if you need anything else from me," I said. "We probably will." "Stay ready." I hung up and turned to the stack of documents still sitting on my dining table, the ones I'd collected from neighbors who'd been targeted or manipulated. It wasn't just about me anymore. This woman had tried to leverage the entire neighborhood as her personal piggy bank. That evening, something unusual happened. A white sedan pulled into Susan's driveway. A man in a suit stepped out and rang the bell. He waited exactly 20 seconds before letting himself in with a key. Whoever he was, he stayed inside for less than 10 minutes. When he came back out, he was carrying a laptop, a thick leather briefcase, and a cardboard box filled with what looked like organized files. He didn't look around, didn't speak. Just got into the car and drove off. I noted the plate's government tags. The next morning, Damien confirmed what I already suspected. "That was from the Attorney General's office," he said. "She's officially under investigation for attempted financial fraud at the state level. The laptop and files were subpoenaed. They're looking into possible identity theft, too." She accessed multiple homeowners' tax records through a third-party portal, likely using her HOA credentials. I clenched my jaw. "How'd she get access to our tax records?" "She set up a fake document processing system last year, said it was to streamline HOA compliance. Most people submitted copies of property tax receipts and ID scans through it without questioning it." I remembered the email. I hadn't submitted mine. I'd been too busy with back-to-back shifts and figured it was optional. "Lucky me," Damien continued. "The system routed everything to a private Dropbox account registered under her niece's name. We're working with cybercrime specialists now to trace the full extent of the data breach." I leaned on the counter, gripping the edge. "So she had access to people's social security numbers?" "Yes. And with that, she could have filed credit applications, fake tax returns, or worse." I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. This wasn't just mortgage fraud anymore. This was a full-scale identity theft operation disguised under the banner of neighborhood governance. That weekend, Gina and Marvin organized a town hall meeting, not an official board meeting, but a gathering for residents to get real answers. They invited a cybersecurity expert, a legal rep from the state housing department, and even a volunteer from a consumer protection nonprofit. Over 100 residents showed up. The cybersecurity specialist, a woman named Dr. Elaine Porter, laid it out bluntly. If you submitted any personal documents through the HOA's digital portal in the last year, assume your identity has been compromised. Freeze your credit. Monitor your tax filings. Contact your banks. There was a ripple of shock across the room. People started whispering, some pulling out their phones to check their accounts right then and there. Elaine continued. The system wasn't encrypted. The Dropbox account was accessible with a simple password: Brookhaven 2023, no two-factor authentication, no firewall, and the IP logs show multiple access attempts from outside the state. Marvin stood and addressed the room. We've initiated a class claim process. Anyone affected can sign up for legal representation through the Housing Department's fraud restitution program. We're also drafting a civil lawsuit against Susan Whitmore and any parties who knowingly aided her. A woman in the back raised her hand. What about that notary? Kramer, he's cooperating, Marvin said. He's under review by the state licensing board and may lose his credentials, but he's not being charged at this time. His testimony is helping build the larger case. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. When it ended, no one rushed to leave. People lingered, talking in small circles, comparing notes. A few brought boxes of cookies or thermoses of coffee. It wasn't just damage control, it was the beginning of something new. That night, I sat on my porch, reading through a draft of the neighborhood's proposed policy overhaul. For the first time in years, residents were rewriting the HOA charter line by line to include mandatory transparency, term limits, and a full audit trail for every dollar spent. A patrol car drove slowly past Susan's house. It paused for a few seconds, then continued on. She hadn't been arrested again yet, but it was coming. Her name was already on the state's prosecution docket. The following Tuesday, a court order was posted on her front door. A formal seizure notice. The state had frozen her assets, her bank accounts, her Lexus, and the shell company in Nevada. Turns out she'd already tried to transfer money offshore, too late. By Thursday, movers arrived under court supervision. They packed her belongings into labeled containers. No one greeted them. No one protested. The neighborhood watched from a distance as the last of Susan Whitmore's power was boxed and cataloged. She never came out to say goodbye. I stood at the edge of my lawn, arms crossed, as the last crate was loaded. One of the movers sealed it with industrial tape and handed a clipboard to the deputy overseeing the operation. Then the front door was locked. A notice was stapled. Property under investigation, do not enter. I turned away and walked back inside. Justice was being served slowly, precisely, thoroughly. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like the neighborhood wasn't just recovering, it was healing. The week after the seizure notice was posted on Susan Whitmore's door, the silence that followed was louder than any siren. Her house sat like a mausoleum at the end of the street, curtains closed, mailbox sealed shut with a court order, and a county padlock on the front gate. Not even the local kids bothered to ride their bikes past it anymore. But the fallout wasn't over yet. On Tuesday morning, I received a formal summons to appear at a state hearing. The Attorney General's office was moving forward with charges based on the evidence I had provided, and they wanted my testimony to support the case. The hearing would be public and open session before a financial crimes tribunal that was now reviewing a cluster of cases connected to Susan's scheme. My name was listed as the key witness in one of the lead cases. When I stepped into the courthouse that Friday, I wasn't alone. Marvin was already there, along with Gina and 2 other homeowners who had discovered forged documents under their names. A few rows back, I saw Janessa from the bank and the cybersecurity expert from the community meeting. And seated at the far end of the room, flanked by her attorney and a stiff posture that didn't match her usual bravado, was Susan. Her hair was grayer than I remembered. She wore a blazer that looked a size too big and kept her eyes locked on the table in front of her. The confidence she used to wield like a whip was gone. The state prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Delaney Cho, opened with a list of charges that made the room shift in their seats. 2 counts of felony fraud, 3 counts of identity theft, 1 count of attempted wire fraud, and a conspiracy charge tied to the fake consulting payouts. There was also a pending civil suit from the neighborhood, but that wouldn't be addressed in this hearing. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the front and took the oath. Delaney approached with a calm, steady tone. "Mr. Belling, can you describe how you first became aware that your mortgage had been altered?" I recounted the envelope, the forged signature, the trip to the registrar's office, and the discovery of the notary's involvement. I handed over a digital copy of the audit trail from the bank and the notarization log that showed Susan's name listed as the witnessing party. Delaney nodded. "And to your knowledge, did you ever give Susan Whitmore or the Brookhaven Ridge HOA permission to amend your mortgage?" "No," I said without hesitation. "I never discussed any changes with her. I never signed anything. I never authorized anyone to act on my behalf." She gestured to the screen behind her, where a scanned image of the forged mortgage amendment appeared. "Is this your signature?" "It's not." She walked to the table where Susan sat and turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, we will also show that this document was used in an attempt to secure a line of credit through Midland Commercial Group, which was denied due to signature discrepancies and unverifiable authorization." Susan's lawyer rose. "Objection. That loan was never approved." "No funds changed hands." The judge raised a hand. "Overruled. The attempt itself is material to the conspiracy charge." Delaney continued, bringing up more witnesses. Janessa from the bank confirmed the HOA email was used to submit the forged documents. The cybersecurity expert laid out how the HOA's document system had funneled private homeowner data to an unsecured cloud account. Then came Marvin, who presented copies of the HOA's financial records, specifically the payouts to Susan's niece under a position that had never been approved by the board. Halfway through the hearing, Susan's expression finally cracked, not when her fake position was exposed. Not when the notary's statement was read aloud, but when Delaney revealed something new. "In the course of our investigation," she said, "we uncovered that the defendant had initiated credit card applications in the names of at least 2 homeowners using their SSNs obtained through the fraudulent document portal. Charges were made within days of those applications being accepted. This is not just mismanagement. This is premeditated identity theft." There was a gasp from the courtroom. Susan's attorney leaned in quickly and whispered something to her, but it was clear the damage had been done. The judge recessed for deliberation, and everyone filed out into the hallway. Marvin stood next to me, arms folded. "She's finished," he said quietly. Even her lawyer looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "I didn't think she'd go that far," I admitted. "I thought it was about control, maybe money, but stealing identities, that's another level," Gina nodded. She was always obsessed with the HOA acting like it was her kingdom. But this was a full-blown criminal enterprise. We didn't wait long. 20 minutes later, the judge returned and delivered the verdict. All primary charges would move forward to trial. Bail was revoked due to the risk of financial flight. Susan's expression didn't change much, but when the bailiff stepped behind her and took hold of her wrists, I saw her blink rapidly like someone trying not to cry in public. The cuffs clicked into place, and she was led out of the courtroom without a word. Just like that, the woman who once fined people for leaving their trash bins out was now facing decades in prison. Back in Brookhaven Ridge, the mood shifted. With the legal proceedings now public, the neighborhood rallied. The interim board led by Gina held a vote to disband the Mortgage Verification Subcommittee entirely. They also contracted an outside auditor to review every financial transaction made by the HOA in the last 3 years. The results were worse than expected. Nearly $60,000 in misappropriated funds tied to fake vendors, inflated maintenance contracts, and emergency expenditures that had no documentation. None of it had been approved by the board. Most of it had been funneled through Susan's niece or her shell company. The board took immediate action. They filed a civil suit to recoup the stolen funds and initiated a policy overhaul. From now on, all HOA votes would be public record and all board meetings live streamed. Proxy voting was banned. Any expenditure over $500 required a 2/3 majority. And best of all, the neighborhood voted to add term limits to all board positions. The woman who had tried to rule indefinitely was now the reason no one could stay in power longer than 2 years. A month later, I received a letter from the state's restitution office. Because I had been one of the identity theft victims, and because my mortgage documents had been fraudulently altered, I was eligible for compensation through the state's victim fund. I wasn't in it for the money, but it was validation. Proof that what I'd gone through wasn't just a personal inconvenience, it had mattered. One afternoon, Gina and Marvin stopped by with a few other neighbors. They brought a tray of cookies, a stack of signed thank you cards, and a hand-painted wooden sign that read, "Carter's Corner where the HOA met its match." I laughed and hung it on my porch. We sat under the shade of the awning, sipping iced tea and talking about the future. Not one person mentioned fines, violations, or mailbox paint colors. Instead, Gina talked about planting a community garden. Marvin was working on a new neighborhood watch program, voluntary, no uniforms, just neighbors watching out for each other. Someone else floated the idea of a summer block party. For the first time since I moved in, Brookhaven Ridge felt like a community. Not a gated maze policed by a tyrant, but a neighborhood where people actually looked out for one another. Susan Whitmore's trial began 3 months later. She was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 22 years with no possibility of early release for the financial fraud counts. Her niece, who had turned state's witness, took a plea deal and forfeited all funds received through the HOA. The notary lost his license permanently but avoided jail time by cooperating fully. He now worked part-time at a hardware store in a different county, far from the mess he helped enable. As for me, I went back to my routine: early mornings, long shifts, and quiet evenings on the porch. But things felt different now. Safer. Better. The HOA still existed, but it was transparent and accountable. No more shadow meetings, no more fake violations, and definitely no more forged mortgage documents. Justice had been delivered, and the neighborhood? It was finally ours again.